Welcome and good morning and welcome to the second webinar of the International EbA Community of Practice, which is a webinar within a virtual discussion series on financing ecosystem-based adaptation. Just a short recap, we kick-started the discussion series on last week on 27th of February with the first session giving an overview of EBA relevant finance sources and instruments and discussing a first country example from Mexico, the Caribbean coast, and how to engage the private sector in financing EBA. In today's webinar, we will share experiences from practice with global and national funds. Let's have a look on the agenda. The first presentation will be on national funds in an EBA context, experiences from the People Survival Fund in the Philippines, and our first presenter is Bianca Gutierrez from the GIZ in the Philippines. And afterwards we move onwards to global funds, and Bahadur Sheraliev from Tajikistan is giving us insights on how to access global funds by the example of the Green Climate Fund and the coordination mechanism for the Green Climate Fund in Tajikistan. And then we have a short input from Susanne Mende, the Climate Finance Readiness Project by GIZ, on how to strengthen capacities of sector experts to access climate finance. My name is Alexandra Köngitter. I'm working as an advisor to the GIZ-implemented global project Mainstreaming Ecosystem-based Adaptation, which is funded by BMUB-IKI. Before we come to the first presentation, just some housekeeping. Your microphones have all been muted, but you can of course engage in the discussion by using the chat box on your right-hand side. Please type in your questions and comments and press on send, don't forget this, and we will receive your questions and read them out loudly. If you're joining our webinar by a mobile device, by your telephone, and you don't have the easy option to type in questions, so please lift your hand and the organizers will unmute you to ask questions. This webinar, as well as the other webinars organized for the International EbA Community of Practice, is being recorded and will be made available on our webpage www.theadaptationcommunity.net, and there look please on the subpage on ecosystem-based adaptation, and on the webinars you will find the recording by tomorrow. And with this I hand over to the first presentation from the Philippines by Bianca Gutierrez.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're here to share with you our experience here in the Philippines on the People Survival Fund, which is the National Climate Change Adaptation Fund of the Philippines. So I'm Bianca Gutierrez. I am from the Support CCC2 project, and I'm also joined by Ms. Dolores Nuevas from the EBA Mainstreaming here in the Philippines. We'd like to share with you first our outline for the presentation. We'll be covering three major topics. First is an overview of the People Survival Fund, where we share the background of how the fund came to be, some of the requirements of the fund and its current status, and we also share some of the insights on the success factors that we observed from the four local government units that were able to access the People Survival Fund. Secondly, as a relatively young funding facility, the PSF had some challenges over the years of it being operational. So we wanted to also share with you some of these challenges and how the government is responding to them. And lastly, we'd like to end on a very positive note and share with you the opportunities for EBA for under the People's Survival Fund. So, what is the PSF? The PSF is a special fund in the National Treasury that is created to finance adaptation projects and programs of local government units and local community organizations. So it is created through the amendment of the Climate Change Act in 2012. It became operational in 2015 when the first call for project proposals was opened in October. The opening balance of the fund is 1 billion pesos, which is around 19 million US dollars, but it can be increased based on, of course, how it is performing and also through the donations from private sector or development organizations. It is created to fund projects of local government units and local community organizations, and it is being governed by the People Survival Fund Board, which is composed of the Climate Change Commission, the Department of Finance, the Ministry for Local Government Units, the National Economic Development Authority, the Philippine Commission on Women, and also representatives from the different sectors of academe, business, and the civil society. So, as mentioned earlier, the People's Survival Fund was created to finance projects of local government units and local community organizations. So, it is open to all local government units, which in the Philippines, by definition, can be at the province level or down to the barangay level. However, being a limited funding facility, it prioritizes local government units with high incidence of poverty, high exposure to multiple hazards, and also home to key biodiversity. And community organizations also need to show some proof of good track record of working at the local level through some accreditation processes. Currently, the PSF's modality is grants, but it encourages counterpart funding of around 10% of the total project cost um, from the proponents. And this can either be in monetary terms or in kind. For example, if the government units would dedicate a specific staff member to implement the project, or for example, under by providing venue for workshops and in some cases land for certain construction of facilities. So what are the activities or projects that can be funded under the PSF? So here on the slide, you will see some of the measures that can be put forward or proposed to the PSF. But at the end of the day, the local government units and also the local community organizations have to assess their own risks and vulnerabilities and come up with measures that directly respond to these needs and gaps. And the PSF is also supplemental to any um, funding that the local government units or the national government agencies allot for climate change activities at the local level. So in this sense, some would consider the PSF as actually an incentive fund for mainstreaming and implementing climate change adaptation at the local level. So how are projects submitted to the PSF evaluated? So here on this slide, we see the list of criteria that is used for evaluation. So we can basically cluster the list into three main aspects. First one being the climate change and local context of the proposal, and to what extent this is considered and this is addressed by the measures under the project proposal. The second one is on the process under which the proponents develop the project proposal. So if there has been enough consultations with different stakeholders, have the costs and the sustainability aspects of the measures and the project been considered. And lastly, on the co-benefits, this is pertaining more on getting more value, of course, for the investments that is given through the PSF. And this can be co-benefits cutting across different sectors or extending beyond the local government territory. And of course, other cross-cutting issues such as gender have to be considered. So on this slide, you will see a summary table of the 4 projects that have been approved so far under the PSF. So you see there some of the major interventions that are proposed by the local government units. So far, there are no projects approved from local community organizations. But from the major interventions here, we can already see that there are some measures that fall under ecosystems-based adaptation. And as most of these local government units are agricultural and coastal municipalities, um, the project centered on addressing issues on food and water security um, with climate change. So our project is currently working on the case study documentation, an in-depth case study documentation of the 4 local government units who are able to access the People Survival Fund because we see the importance of their experiences in making climate finance more accessible at the local level, and also to continue to enhance our efforts to mainstream climate change adaptation in planning and investment at the local level. So on this slide, we just wanted to share with you some of the emerging success factors that we see from the 4 local government units' experiences in tapping the People's Survival Fund. And we clustered it into the 3 appraisal criteria that was also presented earlier. So in terms of climate change and local context, the as basis of the People's Survival Fund projects, the local government units, they're able to narrate and also discuss how the proposed measures are able to address their vulnerabilities to climate change. And this shows their high appreciation and understanding of the difference between climate change adaptation measures and those business as usual activities. And that is really important. Second, they're able to prioritize the sectors that are most vulnerable to climate change and at the same time contributing most to the local government unit's long-term development or economic agenda. In terms of process, all 4 local government units work together with community-based local organizations and academic institutions from drafting of the project proposals to stakeholder consultations, and were also eventually identified as partners in the project implementation. There are also the good leadership of the local chief executives or the mayor who really push for the agenda of climate change adaptation at their own municipalities. And there are also instances where the lessons learned and good practices from pilot implementation projects in the respective LGUs are harnessed and were used to develop project proposals either to upscale the good practices or expand the coverage of these pilot projects. And lastly, on co-benefits, they're able to highlight or underscore the socioeconomic and the environmental benefits of the projects. And again, this is very important because they're able to target the stakeholders' needs in terms of livelihood and capacity building. So the People Survival Fund has had some challenges in its almost 3 years of being operational, but as a relatively young funding facility, we see a lot of opportunities to further enhance and streamline the processes and to reach more LGUs and to fund more local climate change adaptation projects. It is currently underutilized, and the main challenges that affected the PSF would be first on the in terms of capacities on the side of the project proponents of our local government units to put forward climate change adaptation projects, and at the same time on the side of the institutions in charge of appraising these projects, there are also some capacity gaps. And second, there is also the need to strike the balance in terms of ease of access, in terms of requiring more documents from proponents to maintain the fiduciary standards and also to safeguard the money allotted for the PSF. And there are also changes in institutional arrangements at the national level that affected the fund operations. And there were reports of misinformation on the ground on the nature of the fund and also the requirements to access the fund. But these challenges are recognized by the government and they're working hard and also working with partners to address these challenges and to further utilize the PSF and reach as many local government units as possible. So to end on a more positive note, we wanted to share with you also the opportunities that we see for EBA measures in the context of the People's Survival Fund or a National Climate Change Adaptation Fund. So the PSF targets the local communities and local government units, and we really think that it is a powerful tool to empower these local stakeholders to put forward projects that are really responsive to their needs. But also at the same time, we see earlier that there are challenges and capacity gaps that need to be addressed in order to effectively and efficiently address the needs of these communities. And in terms of EBA measures, we see by design um, the PSF can fund projects, EBA projects that are not always prioritized in the national budget. Those measures that may need pilot or further research, EBA measures that respond specifically to the vulnerability of a certain or a particular local government unit that may not be recognized at the national level, and also measures that would address the risks of multiple local government units that maybe share a common resource. So that's the end of our presentation. So if you want to know more about the People's Survival Fund, we share with you here the link and also some of our contact information if you have questions. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Bianca, for sharing your insights on the People's Survival Fund in the Philippines. And we do now have some time for questions. Please, as said, please use the chat function on your right-hand side where you can type in your question and then press on send. And if it's not possible for you to type in questions, so please lift your hand and you will be unmuted by the organizers. I see a first question here to Bianca, and this is on who and how projects are evaluated and monitored. Bianca, could you please answer this question?
Yeah. So actually currently the People's Survival Fund, the projects under the People's Survival Fund haven't started. So, but they set up a monitoring system and framework that would ensure that the tranches to be released will be on a results-based basis. But the head for the monitoring and evaluation will be the Climate Change Commission.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any further questions from the audience? You have now the option to type in your question in the chat box on the right-hand side.
Yeah.
There's another question. Have there already been any private sector contributions to the fund?
Yeah. So far, there has not been some contributions from the private sector. mainly because, of course, a lot would be looking at how it is performing so far. But we are happy to report that just today we heard the news that the first tranche for the 4 projects will be disbursed really soon. So we see a lot of investments hopefully coming in for the National Adaptation Fund.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And we have another question. How long should a project be in operation before they can apply to such funding? Thank you for your question.
Actually, you can apply for the project if that is not yet ongoing. But there is also no limitation so far for local government units who have already received funding from the PSF to apply for another funding.
Second, third tranche. Okay, and another question, Bianca, you said that the project proposal needs to be based on a valid argument. For example, a risk assessment. What methodology do they use, therefore?
Actually, the government does not really prescribe a specific format or like an approach to vulnerability assessment, but we always encourage the use of official national data in terms of using the climate data projections and information. And at the local level, there are also been efforts on mainstreaming climate change in local development and land use planning, where part of it is doing a climate and disaster risk and vulnerability assessment. So yeah, there is also an additional input that the risk assessment that at least at the Philippines at the national level is aligning it with the risk assessment of the assessment report number 5 of the IPCC. So we always try to keep up with what's happening at the international discussions in terms of standards on vulnerability assessments. And this is also the same risk assessment methodology used in the EbA.
Okay, thank you very much. And one final question. Does the fund provide technical assistance to project proponents to help them develop their proposals? In my experience is that local proponents often have very good ideas but may struggle to develop bankable proposals.
Yeah, actually that is one of the most recent decisions by the PSF board, because they do recognize that there are capacity gaps at the local level in developing these project proposals. So they are allotting a segment or a portion of the 1 billion allocation for a project development grant window. So this would be used for project developments, as you mentioned.
Okay, and since there are many more questions right now jumping in the chat box, thank you very much for your very active participation. I would choose one more. For example, how do you address the needs of vulnerable communities living in weak government units which have difficulties to access People Survival Fund? How do you ensure those communities also have the opportunity to access the fund through other means than their LGU?
Yeah, so far the fund is limited to access by local government units and local community organizations, but it is always encouraged to work with different stakeholders at the local level. And we try, of course, to reach as many local government units as possible. And for example, the Climate Change Commission has initiated some partnerships with local academic institutions that would, so that they can have a more reach on the ground, being a national agency.
Okay, thank you very much. I think looking on the time, we will finish here, but there are more questions and we will keep them and bring them into the virtual discussion on Global Campus 21, which is a member space of the International EbA Community of Practice. I will, after all the presentations, explain how to access these member spaces. So your questions will not be lost, but can be further addressed virtually. And thank you very much, Bianca, for sharing your insights and for the discussion. And many thanks to the audience for your active presentation. And with this, I would give the floor to our next presenter from Tajikistan, Bahadur Sheraliev, who is going to share with us on the coordination mechanism to access the Green Climate Fund and in his experiences in Tajikistan. Bahadur, yeah, you have the floor. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Alexandra. I'm glad to have the opportunity to present the experience of Tajikistan in accessing the Green Climate Fund. So my presentation consists of two main parts. First, I will give an overview of the Green Climate Fund and bring some experiences of Tajikistan in accessing it. And then the main part will be the setup of the coordination mechanism in Tajikistan and how the country was able to be successful in accessing the GCF funding. So the Green Climate Fund is the biggest and the fastest growing climate fund, which is located, which was created by the UNFCCC, and the main aim of the fund is to support the paradigm shift in the global response to the climate change. And the headquarters of the GCF is in Songdo, and the main purpose or aim is, as I mentioned, the paradigm shift and the country ownership, on which I will also emphasize later in the presentation. The GCF has the idea to have the 50% on the mitigation and the adaptation portfolio to be divided on the mitigation and adaptation measures. So the fund has the Green Climate Fund has the following structure and access modality. The fund works through the accredited entities, which could be either international, regional, or national once they get the accreditation, and they supports the program which have the impact or get the no objection from the NDAs or focal points. So the focal point, the NDA or focal point is appointed by the national governments and is important body coordinating the activities of the fund in the country and issuing the no objection letter. So just to give you an overview of the accredited entities, the regional, international, and national. So there are, like in the international, the KfW, UNDP, UNEP, and other private banks have accreditation. On the regional level, some regional institutions like in different parts of the Latin America, Asia, and Africa have also been able to get the accreditation from the GCF, and we also have some examples of the national institutions which have obtained the accreditation from the Green Climate Fund. But I wanted to stress that to get the accreditation from the Green Climate Fund is not always an easy task for the national entities, because there are certain fiduciary, financial and fiduciary standards which should be met. And for instance, in Tajikistan, we have been discussing which institution is best suited to get accreditation, and the discussions are still ongoing. But in general, it takes from, I would say, like, depends on the level of the preparedness of the institution, but it takes like an average 2 years to get accreditation for the national institution. The project approval process of the GCF is as follows. The accredited entities, international, regional, or national, comes with the project idea, and if you can see on the right side, the NDA or multi-stakeholder consultation is very important, and the accredited entity comes with the idea to the national designated authority to discuss this idea and to prepare the project concept or the project proposal. And then this proposal, it receives the no objection from the national governments, and then further it's submitted to the GCF for revision and further approval by the board. I just wanted to also mention that one of the distinct features of the GCF from the other funds is that this national designated authority or the country ownership is always stressed, and we can see it in the structure of the project approval process. The criteria for the project selection, which the GCF uses the 6 main criteria for project selection, is one is the impact potential, paradigm shift potential, sustainable development potential, responsive to recipient needs, and it should promote the country ownership, and also like should be the project should be efficient and effective. Why is GCF different from the other funds? As I mentioned, the GCF is the largest and fastest growing with the climate fund, and it has the target which it has the idea of promoting the paradigm shift, or like having big large-scale projects which bring transformational effect, and the country ownership or country-driven approach is also one of the key features of the GCF, which is distinct from the other bilateral or multilateral funds. The governance is also very interestingly structured. There are like 24 members of the GCF board, and the equal number of represented from the developed and developing countries. So there are 12 members of the GCF board which are from the developing countries, and then the 12 are from the developed countries. The access modalities, it could be, as I mentioned, either through the national direct access or through the regional or international accredited entities. The project could be implemented. And the allocation, as I said, the balance between the adaptation and mitigation is the fund tries to keep the balance between the adaptation and mitigation financing in its portfolio. Let me now just go to the experience of Tajikistan and how we started working through the support of the German government and the project of GIZ climate finance readiness. The country has been able to quickly establish the national designated authority and to be effective in engaging different stakeholders and accessing the GCF fund. So the coordination mechanism in Tajikistan, which has been set up, as I mentioned, with the support of the climate finance readiness program of the GIZ, and the main purpose of the coordination mechanism within the country is that there is a systematic coordination in the country, and it's like fixed procedures which all the stakeholders know how to apply for the no objection letter and receive the no objection letter, and how to engage with the NDA and focal point. So and also for the national governments, it's important to have the coordination mechanism in order to ensure their national priorities in the projects or programs which are funded by the GCF. In Tajikistan, we have, as you can see from this slide, we have 3 levels basically, and the highest level is the government level, which has the general supervision or overview of the projects in Tajikistan, and gives kind of endorsement for the final no objection decisions which are undertaken or proposed by the national designated authority. So on the government level is represented by the Vice Prime Minister, so it's quite high, and it ensures that the government attaches high enough priority or importance to those projects or the GCF funding, and to ensure that those projects comply with the national priorities, long-term priorities, strategic priorities of the country. The second level is the national designated authority, as I said, is a focal point, which in Tajikistan, or in all other countries, the national designated authorities are appointed by the government. And in the case of Tajikistan, the national designated authority is the Committee on Environmental Protection. So since 2014, the government appointed the committee to be as a NDA, National Designated Authority, and the chairman of the committee is the focal point. And there is also a secretariat which does the carries out the responsibilities of the NDA in the country. So the in the NDA level, the NDA has the power to convene the technical expert group, which also was appointed by the decree from the government from different line ministries. There are 19 ministries which are relevant to those projects, potential project which could be funded by the GCF, and these experts, the NDA convenes the technical expert groups to review the project proposal. Sometimes we also invite the representative from the accredited entity which applied for the no objection to come and present the project proposal concept to the technical expert group, and they discuss and review the project proposal. And then we have also civil society, independent experts. It's at the moment the discussion was that it will be on the rotational basis to allow different stakeholders, like from the civil society and independent experts, to also be present in the discussion for the project proposal review. And also there is an option for additional technical experts when the project is technically complicated or complex, then, and given if there are funding from the accredited entity, then the country could also hire additional technical experts to review, to help the technical expert group to review the project proposal. This is overall coordination mechanism, and in order for the accredited entity which applied for the no objection, we have the following no objection procedure. The accredited entity applies with official letter to the focal point and the national designated authority secretariat with the proposal and project proposal concept and its desire to receive no objection. Once the secretariat of the national designated authority receives the project proposal, it informs the government that it has received the project proposal and intends to convene the technical expert group and review the project proposal and possibly issue no objection letter. The government then convenes the technical expert group, because they're from the 19 different ministries, 19 line ministries and government agencies. So the technical expert group gathers and they review the project proposal. Usually the project proposal is submitted, we request the NDA requests to be submitted in Russian and in some cases Tajik. So Russian is a working language in Tajikistan, and the technical expert group reviews, gather and discuss, and then they have 2 weeks to provide their feedback to the NDA secretariat. So within these 2 weeks, they go to the ministries and review the project proposal, and within the 2 weeks, they submit their feedback. If no feedback received by the NDA, it means that that line ministry is okay with the project proposal and there are no objections from that side. So the NDA then receives the comments and provides these comments to the accredited entity with the potential, if the comments are not that big, or the project proposal gets positive feedback, the NDA hence the no objection letter. First of all, no objection letter goes to the Green Climate Fund. The Secretariat of the NDA informs the government and putting in the copy of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs that it has submitted the no objection letter to the Green Climate Fund for that particular project, and then also informs the accredited entity on the decision of the no objection. Just to give you an overview of the projects which have been already approved by the GCF for Tajikistan, so you have an idea which projects have been so far discussed and received no objection through this coordination mechanism, and the GCF board approved. The first one is the World Bank project. It's a regional project for Tajikistan and Uzbekistan, climate adaptation and mitigation program for the Aral Sea Basin. We call it CAM for Aral Sea Basin. And so it's medium project from like and the executive agencies are the Committee for International Fund for Saving Aral Sea Basin. Another project which was also approved by the GCF board for Tajikistan is and also other countries. There are 13 countries including Tajikistan. It's sustainable energy financing facilities, and it's also like a focus on mitigation, and EBRD pledged and received this project. Another one is the Tajikistan Scaling Up Hydropower Sector for Sector Climate Resilience. This is mitigation, adaptation and mitigation project, also EBRD, and it's a medium-sized project, and the implementing agencies, national ones, is the Ministry of Finance and the energy company Barki Tajik. In the 1st of March, latest GCF board, actually the Tajikistan has received also like one more approved project for Tajikistan, which was submitted to the World Food Program, and it's a micro project. It's almost $10 million, and the focus is on adaptation. And also another project which was also in the last board meeting, like 1st of March, was approved. It was the ADB project for institutional modernization or capacity building for the Hydrometeorology Agency of Tajikistan. So as you can see, there are Tajikistan is now received, I would say, quite a lot of projects approved by the GCF, which makes us a forerunner. And I wanted to, at the end, to give some conclusions how the community of practice or practitioners of the EBA could strengthen or make it more efficient in their work to maybe cooperate with the NDA and mainstream EBA in their countries, in their respective countries. So first of all, I think that the practitioners, EBA practitioners, should contact or work with their respective NDAs in their countries, and also the mainstreaming of EBA could be done through the national designated authorities by discussing with them and explaining them and including the EBA into the GCF country programs, which each country has to prepare and submit the GCF country program. So this could be an entry point for EBA mainstreaming. Thank you very much, and I will be ready to answer the questions now.
Well, thank you very much, Baudu, for this great presentation and your insights and experiences on how to access the Green Climate Fund. And I see already there are a bunch of questions in the chat room. And for those of you who joined a bit later, once again, you have been muted by the organizers, but you can engage in the discussion using the chat function on your right-hand side. Please type in your questions and press on send. So there are already some questions. The first one would be, what are the priorities of the government of Tajikistan for the Green Climate Fund for the projects? More adaptation or mitigation? More climate or more land restoration based? Thank you for your question.
Thank you for your question. The priorities of the government of Tajikistan, I would say that will be the country now also has received the NDA, each NDA through the GCF readiness and preparatory support receives funding to strengthen ADA and prepare the strategic framework or the country program where each country highlights their priorities. And we have our GCF readiness and preparatory support program was approved by the GCF, and the implementation of this program will start this year. The priorities of the country are more on adaptation because the country is a mountainous country, and more than 70% of the population live in rural areas, and we have high mountainous terrain in the country, which and lots of glaciers, which makes the country vulnerable. So definitely the priority of the country is more on adaptation projects.
Thank you very much, Baudu, for this. And there's another question. Do you have academia and research institutions involved in reviewing the proposal? Thanks for your question.
Yes, thank you. Very interesting question. On those 19 line ministries and government agencies, which I mentioned, part of the technical expert group, we have representatives from the Academy of Sciences of Tajikistan, where they also send their representatives to review the projects and provide their feedback and comments for the project concept, which is submitted for review.
Thank you very much, Baudu. And one final question: are the Green Climate Fund projects focused on one-off grant or used to build up pilot projects to eventually leverage private finance?
Mm-hmm. So far, the projects which have been financed, the ones which have been financed are mostly grants and with the loan component based. The leveraging the private finance, private sector financing has not been yet exercised up to date. The only actually within the climate finance readiness program, we have conducted workshops for the representatives of the private sector where they could get familiar with the opportunities of the GCF and how they could cooperate, but up to date so far no examples of private sector leveraging the private sector funding for the projects.
Okay, and since there are more questions popping up right now, I would allow one more. Do you also integrate EBA measures into the Green Climate Fund proposal? And if yes, please provide some examples.
Mm-hmm. As I mentioned in my conclusions, I think it's very important that those experts who are who are expert on the ecosystem-based adaptation approach, they start communicating with the national designated authority, because from the example of my country, I know that the EBA is not really well known on the level of the NDA, and it's a very important body which is in charge of preparation of the country program, country investment program for the GCF, which where there will be highlighted key priorities of the country. And if the practitioners of the EBA could set up cooperation and communication with the NDA, the EBA could be mainstreamed into these strategic programs and documents, and this could be a very good path, effective path to mainstreaming EBA and getting funding from the GCF for the EBA projects.
So thank you very much for your questions, for the active discussion, and Baudur, thank you very much for your insights and sharing your experiences on the Green Climate Fund in Tajikistan. I see there are more questions coming up, and we will save them and introduce them on our member space of the International EbA Community of Practice on Global Campus 21. So there is room to discuss this further. And well, with this, I would like to come to our next presentation. Sorry. The next presentation, which is a short input by Susanne Mende on strengthening capacity of sector experts to access climate finance. Susanne, you have the floor.
Okay, I think I don't have the presentation rights now. Could you provide them to me so that I can start my presentation?
Yes, you can get the presentation rights by yourself. Just click on your name with a right click.
Okay, great, thanks. No, that didn't work.
Susanne, you're muted at the moment.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, can you see my screen now, the first slide of my presentation?
Yes, we can. Thank you very much.
Excellent. So thanks for giving me the floor, Alexandra. And it was very interesting to hear your presentations. And my contribution will also have quite a strong focus on the GCF. So we continue a bit in the same on the same issue. I'm working for a climate finance readiness program, which was established in the early 2013 to prepare countries for climate finance with a view to the big fund which was about to come, the GCF, the Green Climate Fund. One of our first activities was to create a training targeted to countries who wanted to prepare themselves and get an idea of what was coming. This training was called Climate Finance Training Climate Finance Training, CLIFIT, and it was addressed to countries. It covered external climate finance, like the GCF, Adaptation Fund and others, but also what the possibilities countries had to find finance within their own budget. And this would, in the context of the webinar we are just listening to, refer to the fund that Bianca Gutierrez was presenting earlier. So it's quite complex. It's covering all kinds of issues. And we expected that this training would be really important in the first years, and then that the interest would wither away. But to our big surprise, many colleagues working on all kinds of projects still came to us asking for climate finance trainings. And when we asked what the target group was and what the special interest of the target group was, it turned out that these days the request does not come primarily from governments who want to set themselves up and get an idea how to deal with climate finance, but rather from sector experts who want to implement projects. And we realized that this is quite a different interest and it needs a different training. So we decided to develop this climate finance training for sector experts, CLIFIT for SE. And this is really addressed to people who don't work primarily in the climate context, who sometimes only have very vague ideas of what climate change is about, especially the concept of adaptation very often is not very clear, and who need to learn how to put up some sort of a climate lens and look at their sector through a climate lens. So it's really addressed to people working in the water sector, agriculture sector, transport, energy, etc., who are, in the end of the day, those who will really implement projects, because usually projects are not implemented by climate change experts. So what is in the training? We really try to start from scratch by, oh, hold on, I just have a problem to continue. Yeah, here we go. So the module 1. In module 1, we try to give an overview of the key terminology. As said, things like adaptation sometimes are not clear. We also look into the science base of climate change and give some sort of a framework for everything to follow. And we actually already applied the training and realized that indeed this kind of introductory module is very important. Then in module 2, we really try to turn to the sector, ask the participants, well, what in your sector is climate relevant? And then we work our way through possible indicators who could express the climate relevance from the point of view of a certain sector. And in this module, or in this training in general, we very much work with specific examples from real cases, real projects, and as many sector experts only realized that climate finance could be an interesting thing for themselves because they have heard about the GCF. We usually use examples from the GCF, and we also have a very strong focus on GCF, which becomes particularly important, relevant in the next module, the module 3, which turns then with this knowledge about how to develop indicators, what in my sector could be climate relevant, how do I express it. We look at access criteria, what kind of projects can be funded at all, what kind of additional conditions are there to be fulfilled in order to be able to access a fund like the Green Climate Fund. Then we explain a bit the procedures, some of those procedures that Borodur just explained beforehand, decision procedures, non-objection procedures, etc., internal and external procedures, so that people get a better idea of what they have to expect when they want to apply at the GCF. We always highlight that the GCF is by far not the easiest fund to access, and that there is plenty of other climate finance available, be it bilateral, banks try to increase their portfolio on climate finance projects, and multilateral entities do have specific funds. So we always point out GCF is not an easy fruit. But if you understood this, you have understood everything. So still with the GCF in mind, we highlight that for the GCF, ownership is a key issue. Borodur mentioned it earlier. And this is why we put in one module, the module 4 on country ownership, and we make the link to national determined contributions and thus the link to the big climate politics. One reason is that we also use this training to raise awareness in sectors to engage in the discussion about national determined contributions, because if sectors don't contribute and don't apply themselves, then it is very unlikely that NDCs will ever be implemented. So with this short deviation to national determined contributions, we turn back to GCF issues. In the module 5, we have quite a thorough look at financing mechanisms that the GCF is offering. And we try really to pick up people who have not have a lot to do with banking and with financing mechanisms, and try to give them an idea of how the GCF wants to employ finance mechanisms in order to open up markets for green products and for climate change finance. Last but not least, in Module 6, we give an overview of the grant proposal development of the GCF, and this we do by having a very close look into the concept note with all its requirements, also to give people an idea of how much work they have to expect when starting the adventure of going for a GCF project. So this is the training. As said, we already applied it twice. It's brand new. It only is available since the beginning of 2018. And we already have quite some requests, so we are curious of the feedback we get, and it is open. It's a tool available for well, in principle, everybody. We developed the training. We also had a TOT in Bonn, so we have trained trainers who can provide this training. And if anybody is interested, you're most welcome to turn to us, and we will guide you further. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Suzanne, for sharing this on the climate finance training for sector experts. And once again, we would open the round for questions. You can use the chat box on your right-hand side and type in your question. Or if you don't have the option to type in, so please lift your hands and you will be unmuted by the organizer. So the first question would be, is the training open for people working on cities, or would you recommend it for people working on cities?
Yes, the training for the time being is generic in the sense that it is not made for a particular sector, but we try to find examples from all kinds of sectors. That's why it's also applicable to a group of people who come from different sectors, which would be the case in cities. And we also had in mind to apply it actually on the city level or on other subnational levels. So the answer is yes. We always recommend to engage a trainer for a couple of days on top of the training itself, so that he or she can really adapt the training to the group, to the situation, find the right examples, and yeah, make it really tailor-made to the target group. But then, yeah, it is applicable for cities as well.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. And one question is, how do you ensure in your training that country ownership, beyond consistency with national policies like NDCs, etc., through, for example, highlighting the importance of stakeholder consultations?
Yes, we have the module 4, which is about ownership. We highlight this this idea already in the module on the GCF, but really introduced this module 4 on country ownership on purpose to make sure people really understand that country ownership is key for the GCF, and also highlight on which level country ownership has to be applied. The idea has to be applied, which is obviously not only through NDAs who have to do a non-objection procedure, and not only making sure that it fits into the country strategy, but also through stakeholder consultation.
Thank you very much, Susanne. And there's a group of questions, so to say, asking if the training is just presential, or is it, if it's also possible to have modules or the whole training online as a virtual or blended training.
Mm-hmm. The training is conceptualized as a face-to-face training. And well, it always consists of a set of slides for presentation to provide to the trainer the opportunity to use them or to create his own kind of introduction, and a set of exercises. And in my opinion, the issues that are dealt with are fairly complex, so I really would recommend a face-to-face training where it is possible to have good discussions. Discussions is always a bit the limitation in webinars. We all know this. We all have had this experience. And really good interaction. And I think with the really complex issues we are dealing with, especially when talking about the structure of the GCF or this module on financing instruments, it will be very, very difficult to bring that across without the exercises and without a real good discussion, which is really interactive in a way that it is very hard to realize in a webinar or in a distant training.
Okay, thank you, Susanne. One question is on your comment that you recommend, or that you mentioned that there are options other than the GCF for funding, and which are some of the other donors that you would recommend reaching out to?
Well, I think that really depends on the region and the interest you have. The training is having quite a quick look at other donors and other options. It's not going into depth because, well, it is conceptualized for 2 days, and already there's a lot of material for 2 days. So the trainer always have to cut off some modules or select slides, otherwise it won't be possible to present everything. So in this training we consciously decided not to go into the depth of all kinds of other donors, but to highlight that they are there, and that if they realize, the participants realize that climate finance is a good option for whatever they have in mind, for the project they have in mind, but they see that GCF is too complicated, then talk to donors and identify what else is possible. That's the message we give here.
Okay, thank you, Susanne, for answering this question as well, and thank you very much for your input. Thank you to the audience for your active discussion. There's one further group of questions to Susanne, which I think we can answer in the conclusion to this webinar, and this is how to, whom to reach out to, if there's any contact person, if people want to take part in a training of trainer event or in a training. And I think this will be an option to use Global Campus 21 as a member space. We will send around the link to those who contact me. You will see my email, my contact details in on the last slide, and we will give you the registration link. You will also find the presentations of this webinar and the questions which have not been answered during this discussion, as well as the questions having been answered during the discussions on the on Global Campus 21, and we will happily continue with this topic on this web space. Well, and this webinar is being recorded and will be uploaded on Adaptation Community Net, where you will also find other webinars of the International EbA Community of Practice. This is the second webinar within the discussion series Financing EbA, and there will be a third session in April. Just a short recap, the first webinar last week was an introductory webinar and on how to engage the private sector in financing ecosystem-based adaptation. Today's webinar focused on national and global funds and their relevance for ecosystem-based adaptation. And if you feel that you would like to share your experiences in the third session, please feel free to address me, and we will see how to schedule this within the series. With this, thanks to everybody for joining today's session and for engaging in the discussions. Please contact me for further details, and have a good day. Thank you very much.